The first Infinite Castle movie has already premiered and, as expected, it broke through. But now the question that everyone has after watching it is when the second movie is going to come out. What do we know about it? And to tell you in advance, we know practically nothing. Obviously, we know that UFO will be the ones producing it, that it is part of the final trilogy of the story. The first movie has already come out, so there are still 2 more to go to close the entire final arc of the manga. But we have no teasers, trailers, or new images, so all the official information is the minimum. But the most interesting thing so far is to think about the release date. Some say 2026, others 2027, but as I mentioned in other videos, waiting until 2027 would be crazy. An image also recently came out that suggests that the first movie, Infinite Castle, is going to air anime episodes on television, probably as a strategy to maintain interest and make the most of the economic benefit. That is why in this video we are going to analyze all this. We'll talk about the date, the length, the manga chapters, and how the production is being handled. To understand the second Infinite Castle movie, we first have to look back a bit and analyze how the production of the final trilogy was handled. What we officially know is that the idea of the 3 movies was confirmed in 2020. Ufotable had already planned since then to cover the end of the manga in 3 installments. The first one premiered a few months ago, making it clear that the story continues and that there is still much to see, which means that the second movie is not an improvised project. It has taken years of planning, storyboarding, animation, and is probably quite advanced already. Who knows if it is not finished yet? Therefore, when we talk about the release date, we are not thinking about how long it will take to make it, but about the strategy that the studio is going to decide to follow to maximize the impact and profits. Something that draws quite a bit of attention is the way in which Ufotable is handling the first Infinite Castle movie. Apparently, just like they did with the movie TR Infinite, what they are going to do now is broadcast it on television as anime episodes. But this does not mean that it is a strategy to have more time to finish the second movie. On the contrary, as we already mentioned, it is probably already finished. What they are looking for is to keep the story current, attract more audience, and basically get every last penny possible from the first movie before releasing the second. It is a move that they have already done, and although it may anger many people who want to see the sequel as soon as possible, it is also worth mentioning that the first movie continues to break records in Japan. 2 months after its release, there are still sold-out screenings and the movie is still in theaters. If we compare it to other releases in Japan, it is very likely that the Kimetsu movie will remain in theaters, who knows if even a whole year, ensuring profits while they prepare to release the second movie, which also explains why some are talking about waiting until 2027 for the second movie. Ufotable wants to make sure that the first one continues to be profitable before releasing the next part of the trilogy. Finally, it's worth mentioning that although we don't have any trailers or images, the fact that the trilogy has been planned for years gives us cause to speculate the production followed an intense but controlled pace. There's no rush to finish it in a hurry, but there's a clear strategy for monetization and keeping the entire audience hooked. So when we talk about the release date, length, and adaptation of the chapters, we have to consider it within that context, meticulous planning, and a business that seeks to optimize each release. Now let's talk about the release date of the second film, probably the question that everyone has. Officially, as we mentioned, nothing has been confirmed. The only thing we know is that Ufotable will be the producer and that it is part of the final trilogy. But when it will hit theaters is a mystery, and this is where the theories arise. Some say it could come out in 2026, while others think 2027 is the most likely date. From my perspective, as I've mentioned several times, waiting until 2027 seems excessive. I think it would be too long to maintain interest and at the same time not take full advantage of the fact that the first film is still breaking everything in Japan. But there are several factors that could influence the date. First, Ufotable already has experience with this type of project. As we mentioned, the first film, Infinite Castle, is going to be broadcast in television episodes, something they already did with Infinite Train. Let's repeat, if we analyze other popular franchises in Japan, it's not uncommon for films to remain in theaters for almost a year, especially if they're successful like this one. As we said, the first Infinite Castle film in Japan was released 2 months ago and continues to sell out. For this reason, releasing the second film too soon will affect box office receipts and reduce its commercial impact. So I would think that waiting until the end of 2026 may be reasonable, since it would make the most of the first film without boring fans with such a long wait. The length and content that the second film will cover must also be taken into account. Ufotable still has to adapt several chapters and probably wants to maintain the pace and animation quality that characterizes them, which also influences the decision of when to release it, because even though the film is already well underway, they are going to make sure that everything is perfect for the premiere. Now we get to what many want to know. Which parts of the manga will the second film choose and how long it will last? It should be remembered that the first film covered the beginning of the Infinite Castle and made it clear that the story continues to prepare us for what is to come. The second film could perfectly adapt from chapter 157 of the manga to 182, which is when the Infinite Castle is finally destroyed. Within those chapters, we have several fights. First, Kamau versus DGMA, then the pillars facing Gokushibo, and finally Mitsuri Yovanai versus Nikim. Each of these fights has its own intensity, character development, and dramatic moments that are essential to maintaining the pace and excitement. Also, as always in Kimetsu movies, the flashbacks and character development moments are not going to be skipped. They are part of the narrative and help each fight have the emotional weight it deserves. But of course, this complicates the length calculations a bit, because you have to balance the frenetic action with narrative pauses and character development, even secondary ones. Speaking of length, the first movie was already crazy at almost 2 hours and 40 minutes, adapting 15 chapters of the manga. The second movie, which will probably be even longer, around 20 chapters, and keeps up with the pace, could easily exceed 3 hours, which sounds quite extreme, but you have to consider that the fights will be more frenetic. There will be several flashbacks and scenes that cannot be cut. Keeping all of that in under 3 hours would be very difficult if they want to offer the same visual and narrative quality that has always characterized them. And although we are a long way from the third film, it is clear that this will focus on the final confrontation against Musang and the closure of the entire story. So the second film is going to have to balance intense action with narrative construction. Ufotable is obviously going to take the time necessary to make every detail worthwhile. Fluid animation, visual effects, fight choreography and music that we already know. So, in short, the second film not only has to adapt important chapters, but it will also have to maintain the visual and narrative coherence of the saga. This suggests that the duration may be longer than the first, which for some is crazy, but for others it may also be a positive thing, since each fight and each key moment will be enjoyed more. And finally, let's talk about the strategy behind all this and what we can expect. Ufotable is not only concerned with animation and fidelity to the manga, but also with maximizing the impact of each film in terms of audience and profits. The strategy of releasing the first Infinite Castle film in episodes is a clear example because it will keep the story on everyone's mind, generate more revenue, and at the same time pave the way for the second film. This demonstrates that the franchise not only works as entertainment, but also that it is a very well-calculated business, where every move is planned to make the most of everyone's popularity and demand. In terms of expectations, there are several things that almost everyone agrees on. First, the action and quality. UFO demonstrated that each fight is meticulously crafted and animated down to the last detail. The second film will be no exception. Second, there is the issue of fidelity to the manga. Although there may always be minor changes to improve the narrative or flow, the essence of the adapted chapters will remain intact. Apart from the film, it will surely maintain the balance between fights, flashbacks, and emotional moments, which is so characteristic of Kimetsu and ensures that each character has their own role. After that point, the duration, as we mentioned before, the second film, due to all the content it has to adapt, would not be unusual for it to exceed 3 hours, which may sound exaggerated, but it would be necessary to maintain the intensity and coherence of the story. At the same time, this duration would allow the climaxes of each fight to be properly built and for the destruction of the Infinite Castle to be epic. And of course, if Ufotable decides to expand scenes, add details that were not in the manga or improve the presentation of certain characters, it will undoubtedly be a richer and more satisfying experience for everyone. But we also have to see how long it will really be. In short, what we know about the second film, The Infinite Castle, is practically nothing. It will be produced by Ufotable. It will be part of the final trilogy of the manga, but we do not have a trailer or previews. The first film has already been released and continues to be a hit, which ensures that the story will continue to be relevant and that the second film will have great expectations. For now, all we can do is speculate about dates, length, and content, but given the planning and strategy, a release by the end of 2026 sounds a lot more reasonable than waiting until 2027.